Living the Dream is a series that we have entitled Looking at the Life of Joseph in the Old Testament book of Genesis. And today, before we get to Joseph's story, I want to take you to another story that I think you might even be more familiar with. And it's a story that is very similar to Joseph's story, except for the ending and how it turns out. What is the name of that story? It is called The Count of Monte Cristo, written by Alexander Dumas back in the 1800s. And he tells a story of Edmond Dante, who has people in his life who have it out for him, and they railroad him and get him falsely accused of a crime that he did not commit. And he gets sent to an island fortress prison where he spends the next 9 years. But he figures out a way to escape. And then he's also aware of a treasure that's hidden somewhere, and he follows some clues and gets that treasure. And when he discovers that wealth, it allows him to take on a whole new persona, to have a whole new identity. And the identity takes on is the Count of Monte Cristo. And so what do you do in that moment? Well, he decides to exact his revenge on the people who have sent him away and done him wrong. And so one by one, what he does is he carries out these intricate plots and he destroys them one after another. And at the end of the story, he is strong and he is in good standing, and they have been done away with. So let me ask you this question, because there's a couple of facts around the story of the Count of Monte Cristo. It has been in continuous publication for 180 years. It was the most popular book back in the 1800s. It has been translated into every major known language in the world. 29 movies have been made of this story. Why? Why is this so popular? Why does it seem to resonate with people so much that the story just does not go away? And if we were going to put it maybe into modern terms, we might say wish fulfillment. Let me put it in more stark terms: revenge. Has anybody ever thought, plotted, sort of ruminated on the opportunity and ways to get even with the people who have wronged you? All right, me and 14 people. The rest of you, you're going to listen in on that. But I think this is a pretty human trait here. And why this story is so similar to Joseph's story, I think, becomes pretty easy to understand. Here's where we've been so far. God gives Joseph a dream. It's a God-given dream that one day his brothers are going to bow down to him. Joseph decides to share that with his brothers. Hey, you're going to bow down to me one day. Isn't that great? They didn't think it was so great. And they throw him into a pit, and then they sell him off into slavery. And in slavery, he is falsely accused of rape for a crime he did not commit. And he spends multiple years in prison. And then he has this God-given gift of interpreting dreams. And Pharaoh has a dream that disturbs him. Joseph is brought in, and he says, here's what God's going to do. 7 years of plenty are coming, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. You should set aside food in the times of plenty so that there's enough in the times of famine. And then Pharaoh decides, you know what? I need somebody to run this, and you're the guy, Joseph. And he becomes the second in charge over all of Egypt. And to this point, that story tracks so much with the Count of Monte Cristo. But I'll give you a little bit of an advanced notice here. It doesn't end the same way. So here's a question that we've been asking along the way, and we're going to ask it again today. What do I do when I don't know what to do? And we've asked that with a lot of specific applications of that. And today, we're going to talk about forgiveness and trust. Right? How do I forgive people who have hurt me? And if I forgive, what does it mean to actually trust? And how do I get from here to there? And how do I apply that to real life? Now, let's begin with the whole forgiveness thing, because if you were here last week, you know that Joseph, who is second in command, all of a sudden now had an Egyptian wife. Together, they had 2 sons, and he names the first son Manasseh. Manasseh is the Hebrew word that sounds like the word forget. And here's what Joseph has said. God has helped me to forget all the terrible things that happened to me in the land of my birth. And we paraphrase it this way: I let that stuff go. Forgiveness is when we release a debt. We let it go. We don't, pretend that it never happened. We don't let people off the hook. It did happen. We know and understand that. But we release the debt. Why? So we can move forward. Joseph's second son, he names Ephraim. Ephraim is a Hebrew word that sounds like the word fruitful. And so what he's saying is, I've let it go. And you know what God has done? He's taken me forward. And I've got traction. In the land of my affliction, God is with me. And so there's a point in his life that Joseph gets to, real things were done to me, and they were unfair and wrong, and people have mistreated me. I let that stuff go. I'm kind of done thinking about and ruminating on my family, my weird family. And at that point in the story, cue the weird family, because here they come. And they're coming right back into his life. And that's where we pick up the story, because just as God predicted, 7 years of plenty are now followed by 7 years of famine. People are starving everywhere, but there's food in Egypt. And we pick up the story there. And we're going to walk through this story, because what it pictures for us is this whole idea of how does forgiveness play out? How does trust get reestablished? And so we'll walk through the story, and then we're going to share some quick principles about forgiveness and trust. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the houses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some food for us, that we may live and not die." Do you sense there's still some tension in this dysfunctional family that we met earlier? Why are you all just standing around looking at each other? Some of you should go down there and buy us some food. Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob, who is Joseph's father, did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brothers, with the others, because he was afraid that harm might come to him. Hey, it's a dangerous trip down there. I'm going to keep Benjamin here. But the 10 of you guys, you go ahead. I don't care if it's dangerous for you, but I'm going to protect this one son. One of the things that we've learned along the way is that Jacob had a favoritism issue with his son Joseph, and it caused all kinds of chaos in their family. Has he changed at all? He still has a favoritism issue in his life. So when Joseph's brothers arrived in Egypt, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." And although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Why not? It has been 20 years since the brothers took a 17-year-old Joseph and threw him down in a pit and then sold him off into slavery. He's now 37 years old. Anybody change in their appearance from 17 to 37 at all, if you've reached that? And not only that, you've got a cultural thing going on here. Hebrew people often didn't shave. Their beards were long. Their hair was long. And in Egypt at that time, people pretty much plucked all of their hair. So they looked very different. And now, after all these years, Joseph speaks like an Egyptian, and he dresses like an Egyptian, and dare I say it, he walks like an Egyptian as well. Thank you to all the people who were around the 80s. And then he remembered his dreams about them. He remembers 20 years ago, God gave me a dream. And the sun and the moon and the stars were bowing down. And the sheaves of grain were bowing down to me. And I didn't know what that meant at that time. And I got kind of cocky and proud with that and put it in my brothers' faces. But here is that moment. And could it be that what God knew back then is now playing out in real time, that this is what that was all about? That in this season of great need, the middle of a famine, that God saw this moment in advance of me being here. And remember, Joseph said, hey, God, help me forget. I let that stuff go. But there's also the issue of trust. And we begin to see some things that Joseph does and the way that he talks to his brothers that seem a little bit strange to us, but there's a purpose behind what he's doing. He says, you are spies, you have come to see where our land is unprotected. We are all sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies. Are like, how did we get in trouble here? No, he said to them, you have come to see where our land is unprotected. And this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Now, why would Joseph do this when he knows, these are my brothers, I know who they are, they don't know who I am? You know what he's doing? He's carrying out a test. Are they the same people that I knew 20 years ago? Or have they changed? And so here are the 10 that were involved in what they did to me. Now I know there's a younger brother back at home. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to bring the youngest brother down here to Egypt. And then the next thing he does, he put them in custody for 3 days. You know, why does he do that? I think, we're not told his motive, but I think he's buying some time to think this through and not just react with a knee-jerk sort of decision on the other side of that. And by the way, wouldn't it be great to have your own personal jail that you could put people in? Like, you cut me off in traffic, you get 3 days, in my jail. You cheer for the Denver Broncos, that's a 10-year sentence, That's a football felony right there, so go Cowboys. But we're going to have to figure this stuff out for ourselves, right? Because we don't have that personal jail. On the third day, Joseph said to them, do this and you will live, for I fear God. So now he's going to give them a test. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go and take the grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified, so that I know that your word can be trusted and that you may not die. And they proceeded to do so. And so then they begin to have this conversation amongst themselves before they head back, because this they proceeded to do. But here's what they said to each other. Surely we are being punished for our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded to us for his life, but we would not listen. That is why this distress has come on us. And you can see that they're carrying around some guilt. And sometimes when we've been wrong, we see somebody else's life go on and we think, well, they're just having a day in the sun there and everything's going great for them. We don't see what's happening on the inside. And we're told in a number of places in the Bible that God, the Holy Spirit, one of the roles it plays in our lives is to convict us of sin. So sometimes we have to realize not all of the responsibility is on me to make sure everybody understands what they did. Because God is at work right now helping them to understand what we did is wrong. We were wrong. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. He's speaking Egyptian. They're speaking Hebrew. He grew up speaking Hebrew. So he can hear their conversation, and they don't know that he has heard it. He had Simeon, that's one of the brothers, taken from them and bound before their eyes. And then they head back. And we might ask the question, why, Joseph, would you not just reveal yourself to your brothers here? Hey, I'm the brother you threw into the pit, sold off into slavery. Why are you going through all of this? It is a test. He has forgiven. I forgot about that. I let that stuff go. But who are they today? Who are they 20 years later after all that I went through? And I think Joseph helps us understand a principle around this, that words and tears are not enough to restore trust. Trust often plays out over time and is ultimately demonstrated and proven by behavior and by character. So are they the same people or are they different? And so before they head out, here's how Joseph applies this test. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack. So in other words, we brought money to pay for grain in Egypt. We gave you the money, and when the bags are packed, the money goes back in, they're tied up, and now they're heading back. So in essence, they paid nothing for the grain that they got. And to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they got home and they realized, my silver has been returned, and here it is in my sack. Their hearts sank and they turned to each other trembling and said, what is this that God has done to us? So they get home, we got the grain and we got our money and our brother's in jail. Because if we go back there, we're going to be accused of stealing because we brought our money back with us. And so what do? They do not go back, at least not for a while. But then the grain runs out and they begin to starve once again. And so they have this family conversation about going back. And then the brothers say to their father, Jacob, yeah, but that guy down there spoke really harshly to us. He said we have to bring our youngest brother, Benjamin, with us. Well, Jacob doesn't like that. And he thinks, if I lose that son, Benjamin, after I lost another son, Joseph, who he thinks is dead, it's going to take me out. One of the brothers steps up, and this kind of makes me chuckle a little bit. Reuben said to his father, you may put to death both of my sons if I do not bring him back to you, and trust him to my care, and I'll bring them back. He's like, I will give you a test of my allegiance. If I don't bring Benjamin back, you can kill my sons, but I'm going to be okay, which just seems like a really weird way of trying to encourage his father that it's going to be okay. But Jacob said, my son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead and he is the only one I have left. Really? You got 10 sons standing right in front of you. But hey, you guys go ahead. But Benjamin is the only one I have left. Is he still struggling with favoritism? If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow. But things get so desperate that eventually they say, well, either we die or we go back. And so they decide to go back. And when they show up in Egypt, Joseph knows that they've arrived. He brings them into his house, and now he's going to host them. Now, the men were frightened when they were taken to his house, Joseph's house. They thought, we were brought here because of the silver that was put back into our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys. I don't know what was so special about those donkeys. That seems like a really odd statement of value with the rest of the things there. When the portions were served, they're eating dinner now. When the portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else. Why? Joseph is trying to recreate the scenario in which the youngest son is favored. How will they respond? Here's a steak for you, here's a steak for you, here's a steak for you, here's 5 steaks for you. How will you all respond when you see this youngest son favored? And so Joseph is testing them to see their character. Now Joseph gave these instructions to the house of his steward: fill the men's sack with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. So in other words, it's going to be the same thing. Give them grain, put their money back in there, but this time there's one additional thing. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. So this is one of Joseph's personal possessions, and apparently this was pretty important in Egypt. Put that in Benjamin's bag of grain. And say, when you find it, isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done. You have stolen from the house of Egypt. And whoever is found to have it will become my slave, but the rest of you will be free from blame. This is Joseph giving instructions to his next in command. And so the brothers head out of Egypt. They've got their bags of grain loaded up. The steward stops them on the way and says, hey, something's been stolen in Egypt. We need to search all of your bags. And notice how this plays out. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending up with the youngest. Remember, he knows where the cup is. Joseph told him it's in the youngest son's sack. Kind of dragging out the tension here. Maybe we're okay, maybe we're okay, maybe we're okay. Uh-oh, it's in Benjamin's sack. So what's on the other side of that? Joseph has said, if somebody takes that and it's found in your bag, you will be my slave. And so Benjamin is now brought in and he's going to become a slave, the favored youngest child. And then this moment happens. And one of the other brothers, his name is Judah, steps up. And he says, pardon your servant, my Lord. Let me speak a word to my Lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant, my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Now let me stop Judah's speech and hit the pause button there for a moment. And maybe you know the answer to this question, maybe you don't. Up until this point in the story, Judah, good guy or bad guy? And the answer is bad guy. You back up in the book of Genesis. There was a time when one of their sisters was violated. She was attacked. It's horrible. You know what he did? He killed people, wiped out a whole village. Later, there's ways in which he was immoral. And when the brothers decide to sell Joseph off into slavery, you know whose idea it was? Judah. And now he is stepping up to Joseph, still doesn't know it's him. And Benjamin, the youngest favored son, is about to be taken away as a slave, probably for life. And so what does he say? Now then, please let your servant, he's talking about himself, remain here as my Lord's slave in the place of the boy. And let the boy return with his brothers. And do you hear what Judah's saying? My life for his. I'll take his place. But let the boy go home. Let him go back to his father. I'll serve in his place. And remember what Joseph had been trying to do to understand, are they the same people? Or have they changed? How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No. Do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. He's willing to put himself in Benjamin's place as a substitute. And then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And now he reveals himself, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. And what happens right after that surprises everyone. And we will look at that next week, which is a shameless plug to be with us as we wrap up this story. But when it comes to forgiveness and to trust, let's turn the corner a little bit and ask this question: how do I apply this? So what do I do with that? Right? We're not the second in command of a nation somewhere. So how do we make this real? First thing I think we can say is forgiveness is not the same thing as trust. Forgiveness is releasing a debt so that we can move forward. It's canceling a debt. We're not pretending that it didn't happen, but we're letting it go and the desire to even the score ourselves so that we can move forward. Trust is when we would walk again in relationship with somebody, and that's different. That's not forgiveness. So a couple principles along with this. Forgiveness is a command. Trust is a choice. All throughout the Bible, we're commanded to forgive. And so that one is not really hard to understand. Forgive, yes. And often what we think we are doing when we hold on to the resentment and the bitterness and the desire to settle the score and to make it even, we think that somehow we're enslaving them, but the reality is we're enslaving ourselves. And the person we're letting go when we forgive is ourselves. But trust is a choice. Second principle here, forgiveness is always wise. Trust requires discernment. You know, forgiveness is always the right decision to make. And we're always better off on the other side of that. But even the Bible calls for us to have discernment in the way we walk with people and sometimes the way we do not walk with people. In Proverbs, a book all about applying God's wisdom to real life, hatred stirs up conflict, but love, and the word there is the same for forgiveness, covers how many wrongs? All wrongs. All wrongs. But notice this also in Proverbs, do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered. And even Jesus, it tells us this in John 2:24, that he was performing signs and he was teaching like nobody else. And it says a lot of people trusted him, but it says that Jesus did not entrust himself to everyone because he knew human hearts. So we've got to be discerning. We've got to apply wisdom when it comes to the arena of trust. And also, forgiveness is a gift and trust must be earned. In the English language, there is no word forgiveness worthy. Right? Nobody's worthy of forgiveness. It's something that we choose to do. But there is a word, trustworthy. And that refers to when it has been proven over time and with character. And certainly no one is perfect. But there are moments in which people can change. And to examine that over a period of time is a wise thing to do. Joseph gave his brothers the opportunity to earn his trust when he saw the providential circumstance. That dream is happening right in this moment. God is involved in this story. And yes, even in the slavery and the prison and all of that, because my story is playing out against the backdrop of God's bigger story. And God just showed up. And so I got to figure out how to make that an application of my faith to real life, even with my brothers who hurt me. So let me ask you this question. Is there an unresolved relationship in your life? What do we do with that? I think based on this story, we can say give them a chance, and especially when you see providential circumstance, when you see God show up in a specific way. God is at work even in those difficult moments of life. Forgiveness and maybe trust. There's one part of this story that I don't want to skip over too quickly because I think it pictures something so profound and so powerful that we all need to understand, right? There's that moment when Judah steps up and says, my life for his. I'll stand in his place. I'll serve his sentence. Let him go free. Many generations later, a descendant of Judah came along. His name is Jesus. And one of his titles was the Lion of the tribe of Judah because he descended from Judah. And you know what he says to you and to me? My life for yours. And he came to be our substitute. And he served the sentence that should have been mine, should have been yours. He paid the penalty that was rightfully mine. And he took it upon himself. And that is the way, the only way, in which people like us are made right with the God of the Bible. Someone, Jesus, stood in our place. And we can be set free. And that picture, grounded so long ago in the real life story of Joseph, is one that maybe needs to play out in your life. Have you trusted him? Have you put your hope in him? Have you come to the place where you realize, I can't make it on my own, but somebody came to stand in my place. Jesus came to be my substitute. And that's how I can be made right with God. He invites you to take that step. So let me have you bow your heads together with me. And just before I pray, could today be the day and now be the time to step across that line of faith and to say, I believe that Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, came to be my substitute, to stand in my place, to pay my penalty, to serve my sentence. And I can be free, I can be forgiven, I can belong to him. That begins by us acknowledging the truth about ourselves, that we can't make it. And it means putting all of our hope and trust in Jesus to forgive us and to make us a part of his family. God, thank you for who you are. Thank you for reaching down into this broken world of ours and in the middle of relationships that often go sideways and have a lot of pain attached to them. Thank you for giving us a story that gives us a direction and that gives us understanding about how to make our faith real in some of those hard times of life. And God, behind it all, may we know that our story is playing out against your bigger story. That the lives that we live have God-given value. And we were made to ultimately be journeying with you. And so God, lead us forward as only you can. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for the forgiveness we have received. And I can't help but think of the Apostle Paul's words, forgive one another just as in Christ Jesus God forgave you. We will never be asked to forgive more than we have been forgiven. And when it comes to trust, God, give us discernment, give us wisdom. And may our relationships, all of them, even the hard ones, reflect our desire to walk with you. And we ask and we pray all of this in Jesus' powerful name. Amen.